Everyone's all of a sudden talking about their country's strategic Bitcoin reserve. But what does this actually mean? Is it even possible? And is it positive for Bitcoin in the long term? Or do we have Bitcoiners just looking for someone to pump their bags? Let's dive into it. So first things first, let's quickly cover what a strategic Bitcoin reserve would look like. This was made mainstream in 2024 when Donald Trump got on stage at the Bitcoin 2024 conference in Nashville and claimed,
"If I am elected, it will be the policy of my administration, United States of America, to keep 100% of all the Bitcoin the U.S. government currently holds or acquires into the future. We'll keep 100%. I hope you do well, please. This will serve in effect as the core of the strategic national Bitcoin stockpile."
The concept that a government would be holding Bitcoin as a strategic asset on their balance sheet all of a sudden became worldwide headline news. But this concept was actually proved to be something that would be viable by President Nayib Bukele in El Salvador, where in 2021, his country purchased a couple thousand Bitcoin and since then have accumulated more to be up around 6,000 Bitcoin as a nation state. And we've seen how El Salvador has kind of been setting the track and kind of helping other governments decide what will work and what won't work for a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Basically, what an SBR would be, or a strategic Bitcoin reserve, is the government holding Bitcoin similar to how they held gold back in the 18 and 1900s, before 1971. So there's two sides to this argument. The first side, if you believe that Bitcoin is sound money, which of course I do, then you'll understand that as Bitcoin rises, as the price or the value of Bitcoin appreciates, then holding Bitcoin as a country could be used for amazing things. The other side of that argument is that Bitcoin is too volatile. Some people still believe it's a tulip garden. Some people believe it's a bubble, that the concept of sound money isn't a viable argument. And then of course, you have kind of that the group of realists or the middle ground suggesting, the government can just print. Why do they need to hold an asset? The government prints money only through way of issuing debt. They have this unlimited line of credit, but eventually the debt does technically need to be paid back. And so Donald Trump has suggested in the past that if they hold enough Bitcoin, the value of Bitcoin appreciates enough, he's talking over decades, maybe even a quarter century, then eventually the government could sell that Bitcoin in order to pay back the debt. Now, this has long-term other effects where that much Bitcoin, imagine the amount of Bitcoin required to literally pay back the $36 trillion and growing U.S. government debt. But let's see what Samson Mao has to say about the SBR.
Suppose the US were to adopt Bitcoin under this plan, $1 to 1 Satoshi. What would that transition look like?
Well, it's difficult to say, but under a Trump administration, I believe we could see the start of that, which is the adoption of Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset. So President Trump and Senator Cynthia Lummis have announced plans to create this strategic Bitcoin reserve. So to begin with, they would accumulate a massive amount of Bitcoin, potentially 1 million coins.
That 1 million number does have precedent. It was actually RFK that came out and said, so the way that the speeches worked at the Bitcoin conference was RFK came out first and just blew us all away with his knowledge of Bitcoin. And then he's the one that said, if I am president, I'm going out and buying 1 million Bitcoin, 5% of the entire Bitcoin supply, not including Satoshi's coins, not including the lost coins, 5% of the total supply held by the US government.
And I think from there, the rebasement is just a matter of time when the fiat currency fails. When people no longer want to accept the dollar, we will rebase to Satoshis as the underlying currency. And Trump has hinted of this. He said, maybe we pay off the debt by giving people a bit of Bitcoin.
Who knows, maybe we'll pay off our $35 trillion, hand him a little crypto check, right? Hand him a little Bitcoin.
I don't know if he's exactly thinking of rebasing to Bitcoin, but he's hinting, or at least his line of thought is moving in that direction.
Another commenter says, you can balance government budget momentarily, but US government will create another budget deficit before you know it. Governments are addicted to spending. Yes, we have effectively given the government this mass power for 5 decades, for half a century. Politicians, generations of politicians, the majority of people on this earth have not been alive without a government having this much power. and we have to reduce it. We have to go through this cycle of pain and, frankly, withdrawal symptoms.
My strategy would be, and I really think it's evil genius strategy, right? If it's like, it's so good, our enemies would hate us, but our allies would complain too, and the US would make $100 trillion in a heartbeat. You dump gold, demonetize the entire gold network, you buy Bitcoin, you buy 5 million or 6 million Bitcoin, you monetize the Bitcoin network. All the capital in the world sitting in Siberian real estate or Chinese natural gas or every other currency derivative that's held as a long-term store of value. Europeans, Africans, South Americans, Asians, they all just dump their crappy property and their crappy capital assets and they buy Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin goes to the moon. The US is the big beneficiary. US companies are the big beneficiary.
Basically, what we're talking about here is front-running the inevitable, which is all other assets that have been artificially propped up by a infinite supply of money. Real estate, we're talking stocks and bonds, we're talking, different startups and investments and all this kind of charade of investing, when really you're just trying to escape the confines of the dollar. And so what Saylor's talking about here, and we'll finish the clip in a second, what he's talking about is the opportunity that the US government has, the first country, the first nation state, the first group of people that understand this and front run that won't be forced to buy into that exploding and kind of like hypercycle up market. They'll already have that base layer. All you have to do, ladies and gentlemen, hear my words loud and clear. All you have to do is buy Bitcoin and hold it. That's it. It is so simple. This is inevitable. And we have the opportunity right now to simply wait, to just accumulate and wait and watch the world transition, knowing that we are ahead of the curve.
And while you're doing that, you normalize and support digital currency. And you just define digital currency as the US dollar backed by US dollar equivalents in a regulated US custodian that's audited.
I don't like that. Come on, Saylor, you lost me. Custodian, are we talking 6102 level custodian? Guys, the point of Bitcoin is that you can hold it yourself, but I digress.
What happens next? $150 billion of stablecoin goes to $1 trillion, 2, 4, 8, and probably somewhere between 8 and 16 trillion dollars. And you create 10 to 20 trillion dollars of demand for US sovereign debt. And so you're like, while you're taking away a little bit of the demand because the capital asset of Bitcoin grows, you're adding back the demand to back the stablecoin.
See, this is kind of where I'm starting to lose this Saylor-esque strategy, is that the point of Bitcoin is not to create a debt system on top of it. Michael Saylor understands all of the fundamentals of Bitcoin, but he doesn't understand what is the benefit for humanity. He doesn't get the human side of why Bitcoin is so important. In this world that Saylor is describing, we have someone in control. We have somebody who has the ability to issue debt. This, in my opinion, should be greatly eradicated in order for society, on the largest scale, society to benefit from a true Bitcoin standard. This might be a stepping stone towards a true Bitcoin standard. My recommendation, ignore these stepping stones. Just get to a Bitcoin standard. Buy coins in self-custody. Don't give them away. Don't give the power to somebody else. Buy and hold your Bitcoin yourself. Commenters here, take your meds. See, I might actually align with this commenter. Probably, it strikes me that he's suggesting that Michael Saylor is crazy for thinking that Bitcoin is the best form of money. He obviously isn't. He's correct in that sense. But it is crazy to me how many people, look at this. This is like a month ago. This man is telling, dude, Bitcoin's at 100,000 US dollars. You don't think it's going somewhere? You don't think it's going bigger? Weaponizing Bitcoin seems like a very dangerous play to me. Bitcoin will win. Preach. We do not need to bankrupt the global banking system through an abrupt devaluation of all hard financial to get there. Devaluation by individual choice versus government force. They're kind of the same thing. The government is basically just a large group of people that have the same opportunity with Bitcoin. This is kind of one of the cool things about Bitcoin, is that it levels the playing field. Now, when you have a naturally aligned incentive system like Bitcoin, we have a problem. And that problem is that everyone is trying to race to get the most. Everyone's trying to race to accumulate. We're in this accumulation stage of Bitcoin. We will be for the next 10, 20 years. And at the end of the day, the governments are not incentivized to just sit on their hands. right? The US government will fail if they do not adopt a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And at the end of the day, people realizing that weaponizing Bitcoin is dangerous, that's right. However, we have to understand the government will do dangerous things in order to thrive and succeed. What you and I have to do is vote with our hands. We have to understand the dangers here. We have to truly appreciate that the government will do whatever it can do to stay ahead, especially to stay in control of you, and we need to act accordingly. What does that mean? Buy Bitcoin in self-custody. How are Bitcoin people, you Bitcoin people, I like that I used capital B though, that's a proper noun, thank you very much, not noticing the Pied Piper and the cliff in front of them? Bitcoin used to be about a revolution. Now it's about number go up and facilitating the system to live on into infinity. Yeah, I think this is probably a take that I do agree with, and I think is one of the biggest dangers, one of the biggest threats to Bitcoin. We are all kind of cheering on for Saylor and the government to centralize and kind of mass control the economic powers of Bitcoin. What gives me hope is that the Cobra effect will continue to play out. There are going to be secondary and tertiary consequences to a strategic Bitcoin reserve. One of the happy accidents that happen will be that if you're holding Bitcoin, your bags will pump. So what does all that mean for us? What does all that mean for you and I as we have governments seemingly racing to adopt a Bitcoin strategic reserve? I myself am a proponent of my province here in Alberta adopting a Bitcoin strategic reserve. I want to see more Bitcoin in the area that I am. That's because I'm a realist. Governments are in competition with each other. It is a race for the government to understand and to adopt a strategic Bitcoin reserve. We are going to see a pile of bloodshed, of people doing it wrong, of negative incentives. However, I do believe that a strategic Bitcoin reserve is probably good in the short term, yet bad in the long run. I don't think we want governments, we want centralized entities controlling this uncontrollable money that we have. And so we need to look very, very closely at the incentives and the missions of our future leaders. We need to understand, what are they going to do with the Bitcoin in power? Imagine if Trump buys a million coins. Imagine if they hold 5% of the supply, and then they change office, and then some communist gets into office and sells the coins. That would be catastrophic. Imagine if the sovereign leader, some other random country, buys coins and then has a back-end deal with the US later on to sell or buy countries. We're talking about mass backdoor deals, the power to do mass backdoor deals at the largest scale ever, because we're using and talking about an asset that has only ever appreciated in value over a long time frame, rather than an asset that depreciates on a long enough value. So with that, I ask you, should Bitcoiners be championing their way into sovereign nation states buying Bitcoin, or should we be trying to prevent this? Do we have a low enough time preference to try to prevent the inevitable? Bitcoin ultimately is bad if it becomes economically captured by governments. But you and I can still own some. How do we wrestle with this in our heads? So I want your predictions in the comments down below. Over the next 6 to 12 months, we are going to have probably the most turbulence we've ever seen in this Bitcoin industry. How do you think in the next 6 to 12 months the Bitcoin strategic reserve will play out? Let me know down below. As always, if you like these videos, if you like these takes, comment, like, subscribe. Let us know what you like more of. We've noticed that when you're watching Bitcoin content, you're more engaged, you're more excited to watch it. Is that the case, or do you want to hear more well-rounded takes about how Bitcoin affects the world? At the end of the day, my call to you, as always, is to stay sovereign.